Hi, all. Thank you, Hassan, for welcoming us with your beautiful music. And thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Goodwin Van Camp. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Combatants for Peace. For those who have been with the movement for a while, thanks for joining us today. And for those who are new, welcome to the movement. I will share a little bit about who we are. Combatants for Peace is a joint Palestinian-Israeli community working in solidarity to end the occupation, discrimination, and oppression. We believe in a future where all people, from the river to the sea, live in peace with dignity, justice, and liberty. The movement was founded almost 20 years ago by combatants who laid down their weapons and joined forces to non-violently resist the occupation and co-create a future where all can be safe and free. They're the only movement worldwide founded by opposing members of an active conflict, and as such, they've been nominated 2 times for a Nobel Peace Prize. The movement is guided by the values of nonviolent resistance, and they are showing the world that there is another way. Our talk today is Radical Imagination for Collective Liberation. I want to thank our moderator, Ray Abelea, for facilitating the discussion. Ray is a social change strategist, writer, facilitator, and Jewish ritualist. After the 2008 bombing of Gaza, called Operation Cast Lead, she became active in the global movement for a free Palestine, traveling to Gaza as an organizer for the Gaza Freedom March in 2008 and co-leading delegations to the West Bank with Eyewitness Palestine. Before I hand things over to Ray, some quick housekeeping. First, the talk will be just a little over an hour. We are very fortunate to have Hassan with us today, who will not only speak, but he is going to close our time in a song that he wrote. This talk will be recorded and we will send a copy out by tomorrow. If you have any questions for the speakers, please send them to Lindsay with the title Send Questions Here. That's how her name is in the chat. And she will be sharing your questions throughout the entire talk with Ray. And with that, thank you, Ray. I want to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Combatants for Peace, for hosting this space to imagine and breathe into collective liberation today. I'm grateful to be holding space for this conversation, zooming in right now from the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people here on the California coast in the United States, and offering respect to the First Nations peoples of the places where we each are. In this time of incomprehensible violence, I want to thank all of you for showing up today, for saying yes to take time to imagine with us. As Adrienne Marie Brown says, imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of ability. I often feel I'm trapped inside someone else's capability. I often feel I'm trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. And so that's what we're up to today, is engaging our own creative imaginations. And for some of us, opening our imaginations can be really joyous and fun and creative. And for others, maybe it's painful given traumas or family legacies we carry. So I just want to remind all of us that as we tune into this conversation, please remember to use the tools you have for staying present, whether it's breathing deeply, taking a sip of water, moving your body if you need to do what you need to do to stay well-resourced so you can fully listen and participate with kindness in the Q&A and the chat today. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the conversation, 3 amazing humans we'll be hearing from. First of all, Hassan El-Tayyab. Wow, we've just tasted the beauty of your gifts as a musician and songwriter. Hassan is also the author and an advocacy organizer and legislative director for Middle East policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL, working relentlessly to end the US military involvement in the Saudi-led war on Yemen, advocate for Palestinian human rights, and advance diplomacy with Iran. Thank you, Hassan, for this sacred work. And Marcina Hale, welcome. Marcina is a therapist and facilitator who has spent the last 2 decades crafting workshops for individual and communal change and transformation. She's the president and co-founder of Reconsider, executive producer of Fantastic Fungi, and producer of the film Disturbing the Peace, which of course centers the story of Combatants for Peace. And Stephen Apkon, welcome. Stephen is an award-winning filmmaker and social entrepreneur who founded a nonprofit film and education center in New York called the Jacob Burns Film Center. Stephen is the director and producer of the Disturbing the Peace film, and also an executive producer of Fantastic Fungi, Planetary, and Backyard Wilderness. So what a gift to weave with artists, storytellers, policy advocates, and leaders in this way today. I'd like to just open our conversation with the three of you by beginning with you, Hassan. I'd love to ask if you could share with us a bit about this current moment that we're in.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
This is really just an absolutely horrific moment. There is an unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now, and I think a lot of people are just heavy over what's unfolding. There's a famine. Samantha Power, USAID director, just came to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Actually, to my right, I'm staring at the Senate right now. I'm on Capitol Hill. And, there's a growing acknowledgement that what's happening is just beyond the pale. Again, famine is breaking out, and that's in large part because of a blockage of humanitarian assistance, ongoing airstrikes, destruction of critical facilities. And, as horrific as that is, we know it can get worse. And there's just this incredible, move right now that's needed across the US, across the world, to call for a ceasefire, de-escalation, restraint, respect for international law. And that's what so many people are doing right now. I think folks may have also seen that, at the same time as this is unfolding, Congress just passed a large supplemental package that included, billions in unconditional military assistance for the Israeli government. It cut off UNRWA funding, which is an incredible resource, not just for Gaza, but also the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. I had the privilege of actually going to Palestine and Israel in January, and I heard from people, all over, Israeli human rights advocates, Palestinians, that they desperately want a ceasefire. They want humanitarian access, and they want to try to end, a lot of them asked us to help end US complicity, and that's what we've been trying to do. One thing I will say, though, is as grim as things can feel, there is this incredible awakening inside, on college campuses across the country that are just, fed up with the status quo, that don't want to see, any more violence against civilians, full stop. This isn't about, picking or choosing. This is about trying to end the violence, about bringing hostages home, ending the airstrikes. And that is absolutely inspiring to me. I'll also say at the beginning of this conflict, a lot of people told us that you're not going to get 20 members of Congress calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. And now here we are, we actually have almost 90 members of Congress calling for this. And that's what you're not maybe always hearing. But I am so grateful to this community, to everyone here who I know just is really heavy right now over this and wanting to do more. And I think the way forward really is our, collective liberation, making sure that we are in community and in collaboration, sticking together when it gets really hard, using art, storytelling, and, not being afraid to disrupt the status quo and business as usual. So thank you, and maybe I can pass it back.
Thank you, Hassan. And maybe that's a perfect segue into thinking about, amidst it all, amidst this heartbreak, amidst this uprising, how do we define the terms collective liberation? It's easy. We have these buzzwords sometimes in social movements, and wonder how do each of you define collective liberation and radical imagination Marcina, maybe we can start with you. And we'll just need you to unmute.
Thanks, Ray. Sorry about that. I think it's even how we define this particular moment. You know, sometimes when things get worse are the opportunity for the most to change. The opportunity for change comes in. And there's a saying that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, you'll direct your life and you'll call it fate. And a lot of things that are happening in many places around the world have been unconscious. And I think that the coming to consciousness of sometimes what we call, you know, the shadow or the areas that we really need to look at. And I think one is really thing that's really important, and even in the film we did, Disturbing the Peace, about Israel Palestine, is to understand this isn't an Israeli Palestinian issue. This is an issue that affects everybody in the world, and it also calls us out to look at ourselves in it. And so in our ability to actually take this period of time and become much more aware of the position that we're taking and the language that we're creating in it, are we bringing in a language where we are not creating more hate in the world, but more clarity of what is not okay, where we as humanity take a step and say, you know, we do not want to live in a world where violence and hunger and these kinds of ways are there to address any issues that we have. I think it's really interesting to think that war has rules to it, because that is in one way a very insane way of looking at humanity. That'd be like in a family, a mom says you can, you know, kill your brother, but just do it in the right way. I think that there's a place where that people are standing up and saying that's not who we are, that's not who we want to be. And I think the more people that do that and use that, not against something, but for something. And so when you look at the work of the Combatants for Peace, you know, often what they do when they come together is they first go into their own groups and they deal with stuff that's are issues within their society, so that when they come together, they're actually coming in to be able to address each other, understanding that each of us have our shadow work and things that we need to work on. And so I think that it's this time that the kind of work that they're doing out in the world is critical. And it's really important, the language that we're using, the non-demonizing other people, but the standing for something. So that's what I would say collective liberation is. And when we understand that all people are in the same boat, and so it's our liberation comes together.
Beautiful, thank you, Marcina. I'm curious, Stephen and Hassan, if you'd like to add in your definitions: collective liberation, radical imagination. Stephen, how about you?
I think I'm unmuted now. First of all, thanks for having me and us, and for everybody joining this conversation, which I can't think of a better time to be having it, because we need to be able to imagine something different. It is clear after all of these decades and years that the failure of imagination that has been present for so long has brought us to this place. Radical imagination to me is the ability to imagine beyond the current trauma, beyond the state that we're in a way in which, in essence, where it feels radical, where it feels almost impossible. And I think that when you look at peace movements around the world where peace ultimately was realized, it wasn't until the moments before that you actually believed it was possible. And so when I look at Combatants for Peace, they have, in their existence, in their 18 years of existence, they have defined and personified the idea of radical imagination. The idea of bringing 70 people together 14 or 15 years ago to, in a fringe theater in Tel Aviv, to actually stand together and mourn the losses of both people on a day that is so sacred in Israeli culture was a radical idea. That's a radical imagination. And that kernel, that seed, has grown to something that has over 250,000 people worldwide. We had 15,000 people together. I believe it was the largest recognition of Memorial Day in Tel Aviv, not just public one. And so that to me is the idea of radical imagination. And I would also add a third term, which is one that Marcina brought in the other day, and that is the idea of courageous manifestation. It's not just enough to imagine. That is what we have to do first, and then we have to move into building what we see as possible.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And Hassan, over
Yeah,
to you.
thank you. I could listen to Stephen and Marcina talk all day. For me, collective liberation acknowledges what I believe is true, is that we actually can't unstuck these injustices unless we do it together, unless everybody is liberated. And knowing that our fates are tied. I mean, and there's so many examples of this. Obviously, climate change is a huge one, but this this Israel-Palestine conflict that's been going on decades is something that we're not going to be able to unstuck until there is actual collective liberation. I mean, that's such deep work that needs to happen to do this. I mean, I'm a lobbyist. I do this kind of advocacy on Capitol Hill, but we know these issues are way deeper. It's not just about policy and passing pieces of legislation. There's deep trauma that needs to be kind of processed as a community and unlocked. And honestly, so grateful for Combatants for Peace and all the supporters that, because I see that as such a huge part of the solution, where people have these traumas, they've been in conflict, and are using storytelling and their voices to try to bring people together. And it's such a breath of fresh air. So I think this is such an incredible model, and we all have to live into that. And it's obviously just this horrible moment, but there are these like glimmers of hope in the darkness, and I think this organization is definitely one of them. And I said it before. I actually saw Naomi Klein give a speech. I don't know if folks saw her Guardian article called "The Exodus from Zionism," and I was blown away. It felt like, I don't know if folks get a chance, but hear her speak. It was just absolutely incredible. And she gave the speech during a Seder at this Palestine, solidarity rally. And I think that is also an embodiment of this collective liberation, and looking forward to digging in with everybody more.
Hassan. The Exodus from Zionism plays on an old biblical story with a critique of a modern political ideology. So thinking about the ways that imagination can help us make new myths or reinterpret myth making. And some folks tuning in, seeing some questions around what does it mean to navigate this collective imagination and face the current polarities or binaries around oppressor, oppressed, these dual camps we get into. Another article in The Guardian just today, I believe, was talking about pro-Palestine, pro-Israel versus this notion of what are we standing for? What does it mean to be pro-peace and justice? Who might want to speak to that?
I think that's one of the key concepts that came out when we were doing the film, is the understanding that both the oppressed and the oppressor are both oppressed. And the importance of understanding that, because so often the oppressed ends up becoming the oppressor. And so it's the same thing as the bully becomes the bullier. And the question is, where are we going to be able to stop that cycle? And there's the line that we've created between countries, religions, or cultures, in one way is part of the problem, because it is in every culture and in every religion and so forth, we have the fear-based othering of people. But in all religions and cultures, there's the ability to hold love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness. And the question is really, where are we able to cross the line in the place where we're holding, you're either for us as humanity and how we treat each other, or you're supporting a war, division, and which is leading us ultimately to our own destruction, both environmentally and also through war. And so this decision is and who we are as individuals, but it's also, instead of demonizing any religion or cultural country, is actually holding them to a higher possibility, a higher standard, and also calling out, again, what I call the shadow side of all of it. And, even in the United States, we knew through the work that we were doing that the money that we were giving from the United States over to Israel was being used to buy US weapons. So that's supporting a US economy. Now, that's something that we need to look at. And so I think that education around this, but without a sense of hatred or anger, but actually a greater sense of standing for something different, calling out, and being able to bring in a sense of possibilities of what needs to change. And that's what I would say that's the most important right now.
I would just add, Ray, to that um, I've learned over the years that saying no or enough can be an act of love. It doesn't have to be an act of hate. And so one of the things I think that we need to do as we begin to reimagine what's possible is to really think deeply about where we're coming from. Because when we decided to make the film, it was really based on a conversation with two people who are founders of Combatants for Peace, Hassan Alon and Suleiman Khatib. And I asked them, what is this organization really about? And Hassan said, we're a community of people taking responsibility for our own creation. And Suli said, we're breaking the cycle of violence by breaking our own sense of victimhood. Those two ideas were a manifestation of an imagination beyond the current narrative. And what we learned as we began to make the film was that everybody who's depicted in the film and everybody who's participated in Combatants for Peace has gone through some experience in their life that essentially threw them far enough outside of their culture, their narrative, their story to realize that they were playing a role in somebody else's story. And once they knew, they couldn't not know. And that was the beginning of the work. That's what we're being called to today, to do the same thing, to be very discerning about the media we consume. Because the media is structured in a way to polarize. It is structured in a way to be incendiary. It is structured in a way to highlight breaking news at every moment and to get us not to turn our heads away, and to position ourselves against each other as opposed to working towards something together.
Ray, I want to add something to that too. When the film usually was end and we did the Q&A, and this is typical, the voices that were always the loudest were the ones of hate, anger, all of that. Was the loudest voice. And the ones that really held a new opportunity, seeing it a different way, were always more quiet and sometimes would come up to you afterward and talk. And I think that voice actually has to be the one that when the film ends or when something is, that it learns to speak up and it learns to go ahead and and that's, I think, what Steve was talking about too before, that we always talk about, is the courage to manifest it. You have to speak up and say, this is not who we are, and to be able to hold another space and hold it collectively, which the combatants are doing.
Would it be all right if I shared a thought as well?
Please go ahead.
So I work for a Quaker organization, FCNL Friends Committee on National Legislation, and I'm not Quaker myself. I'm actually agnostic. My mom's Catholic. My My dad's Muslim, and so I decided to kind of meet him in the middle and be agnostic. But there's something that I love about this Quaker testimony that I use all the time, and I really lean into in my advocacy work is, and letting people know that I believe that there's inherent good in the spirit in every single person. And starting from that basis, and then letting people know that these are my values. I right now I've been co-chairing the Ceasefire Coalition in the U.S. It's like a block of like 80 or 90 national organizations, and we have really clear values. We want an immediate ceasefire, and we want to protect all civilians, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian. We want to bring the hostages home, and that's been a clear as a bell, and it's been so. That's what people want. And it's been such a helpful tool. And one more thing I'll say is another part of the Quaker kind of testimony that we've been, I actually ducked out. There's a staff meeting right now, and I ducked out to be in this with you all, but it's actually they're studying Quakerism 101, so forgive me if I'm going on about this. So we have three types of storytelling, and I think what's so powerful about disturbing the peace, combatants for peace, is storytelling is at the heart of this. And we're in this really crazy, toxic media environment, and the way we move towards this vision is through the storytelling, which can cut through the noise, can speak directly to people's hearts, and also music can cut through language and get right to people's hearts and soul right now. And I think that's so important. We sort of, when I do these lobby workshops, I teach people, there are like three really effective ones. It could be your personal story. I've been personally impacted by this situation. My family's Jordanian. I have family in the West Bank, and we're terrified, that settler violence is going to, run amok. We're terrified for so many reasons. Then there's this turning point story. Hey, I used to think this, and then I learned, and then I think this now, and really having this breakthrough, reconsidering your entire reality, and really sharing that story to help people come into that space with you, and then dropping into your own personal values, and really, saying this is clearly, unjust. My values say this is not okay, and not being afraid to use these tactics. So as we move forward to this collective liberation vision, I think that's one of the biggest tools in the toolbox. Making sure that we are centering real life experience in this advocacy work.
Beautiful. And Hassan, a follow-up question for you here from someone that's joining us today online. How can we better understand policy making? How can we link protests to policy better? And should we? And maybe just to add on to that, how is this collective imagining framework coming into how you're approaching policy?
Thanks for that question. I am actually a musician first and a lobbyist second. So if I can do it, literally anybody can. And I tell people it's actually quite simple. We just want to stop selling bombs to governments that are using them to kill civilians. I haven't not, I was working on, Iran, I was working on Saudi, UAE, human rights, Israel, Palestine. To me, I don't see this as, any different than these other situations. Obviously, there's a lot more history and it's more complex in a lot of ways. But the basic rules apply is that we shouldn't let US weapons be used to abuse human rights. That's enshrined in US law. So you can let any member of Congress know, hey, what are you doing to make sure these weapons are not being used to violate human rights? And I tell that to constituents that we work with on lobbying. You don't have to be an expert to be able to get your voice heard. One brief story, I was lobbying, okay, this is recorded, but I was lobbying Senator Risch. And I'm sitting at a table with him. There's some Yemeni allies, a few students from Idaho, and we were surrounded by his entire team. And it was, at the very beginning of the meeting, he said, Hassan, I don't want to hear from you because I'm the lobbyist, And of course I talked anyway, of course, because that's what I do. But, I started throwing out these arguments. He was ducking, he was dodging, we were getting really into the weeds. And a constituent said, actually, Senator, I don't know about all that, but I don't want to see US taxpayer dollars going to bomb kids in Yemen. And he said, I can't argue with that. It was the one thing that actually cut through the meeting. It wasn't what I said. It was what this, constituent that didn't really have a lot of this policy background. So I would just urge, everyone, work with an organization that is doing advocacy, and support that work. It's not rocket science. You can obviously work with FCNL. We'd love to see you around. And make sure that you're centering these values. So there's I could probably say a whole bunch more. I know it feels really overwhelming and complicated, but know that all this advocacy that's been going on for the past 6-7 months, and a lot of it I'm sure is from people in this Zoom room right now, is making a huge difference in the conversation on Capitol Hill, and we need to keep going, and we need to double down. And last thing I'll say is I'm looking at these college protests. If you think they're going to stop with a ceasefire, I'm sorry, you're dreaming. They're not going to stop until there's actual liberation for everybody in the region. And I'm so convinced of that. And I want to support them however I can.
Beautiful. Marcina, over to you.
Well, I just think, we just had a conversation with Tiokasin Ghost Horse, he's actually was in the film Planetary, but he's also a neighbor and also on our board. But he was also talking about how closely tied in the natives here are with the Palestinians, and there's in the growing support for kind of like a global look at what has happened over our history on the planet, and maybe more of the understanding of a bigger united possibility. So I do think that the students that are here are also standing, not just, it's in general, this feeling that we need to face the things that are not working right now and take a look at our history and do some work and make some other choices. And I do think, and I do want to ask all the students and so forth, and this is what I feel like is really important about the language and how we do it, is that when you start making it, again, another hatred towards, in any way, an anti-Semitic or violent kind of way, that is where you have to really watch it. But I think it's really important that these students continue to show up and do it in a nonviolent way. And coming from Ohio, we have a memory of Kent State as students stood up, and how do we actually do that collaboratively and with the Palestinians, with the Israelis that are standing with it too, because there are Israelis that are very much a part of this, a lot of Jewish organizations as well. And how do we shift in humanity and stand together?
I would also add to that we have to both take responsibility for our participation in it, those in the U.S. and those in other countries that are involved in supporting this war effort in some way. But we also have to shift and get out of the colonial mindset that we're the ones who dictate how it's going to go down, when it's going to change, and that we believe we're the only ones who can change it. There is an importance of regional alliances, in the Middle East region with countries that have work to do together around climate change, around water, around energy, around human rights. And those are things that are not going to be led by the United States and others who have really lost credibility in the political decisions we've made. And so we need to be looking both within and outside of our culture and outside of our mindset for it's radical imagination to believe that other people who we have othered or we have diminished in some way have better answers than we do. But we need to be very much open to
that. I'm hearing in what you're sharing, Stephen, something about that cultural humility, right? And I just pose a question to all of you here, and we're talking about collective liberation. So we're bringing us into a collective space, and so everyone can see the full panel here on your screens now, I hope. It's one thing to imagine, and it's another to have the courage to move toward the vision. And I think we talked about the audacity of Combatants for Peace and really having that courage, right, to get together in that first meeting 18 years ago. And I'd like to ask what your practices are, each of you, in taking the courage to manifest um, those visions or ideas out in the world.
Who do you want to go first? I mean, I don't mind going first because I'm sitting here actually at the farm that we have at Reconsider and starting a women's gathering. And in that women's gathering, we work hard to bring people from different cultures together so that we can understand where we've fallen short in so many different ways and the ways that we can honor the different cultures and different things that are happening and continue to learn from each other. And these are, women leaders in all different kinds of ways. And I think that one of the most important things is we need to always know that we don't know. Like even as much as I've learned about I mean, because we traveled for over 2 years with the film Disturbing the Peace, we were involved with a lot of conversations, a lot of different things, and my eyes were open to so many different aspects of what's happening there. And I come back and I hear these very short snippets online of people that hear a part of the story and just continue it. And I think we got to always know that as much as we know, there's a lot that we don't know. So can we be in curiosity of what another person sees or experiences and are able to have important conversations with them and in honor of the different perspectives. And that's what I work on too.
Just to reflect, it's such an embodiment of making manifest the vision or the imagination to actually go out and make a film about it, because that form of art can inspire us, right, and reach so many people. How about you, Stephen?
And then I was going to say, right, in many ways, the film is the embodiment of a practice, because what we learned was that each of the individuals had gone through very similar experiences, as I said, whether they were small or big traumas. But if you were to track the movement of transformation, if you were to track the movement from being stuck in a narrative to the freedom to transcend that narrative, there's really what we see as 5 stages or 5 movements to the film. And we talk about that in Reconsider. And the first, as Marcina said, is curiosity. How can we have the curiosity, the deep curiosity that suspends our judgment about how the world works or what the answers are, to allow ourselves to be surprised? Because that also is the beginning of empathy. So then to move from curiosity to awareness of how these things play out, and then to owning our creation, to taking responsibility for our involvement in these things. And then comes the reimagining, the radical imagination, and then the courageous manifestation. And what I've seen with so many of the combatants is that they do enjoy a freedom that very few people get to enjoy in their life, which is the freedom of being outside of a narrative that tells you who the hero is and who the villain is. And the other practice I would say is really captured in the title of the film, Disturbing the Peace. The title came up because after a nonviolent protest with children and families, and it was a beautiful expression of a desire to be together. And after they parted ways at the end of this beautiful day, they drove off in 2 directions, the Palestinians further into the West Bank, the Israelis toward Israel. And after a couple of kilometers, both of the caravans were stopped, and 2 people were arrested, 1 Palestinian and 1 Israeli, who were perceived to be the leaders of that demonstration. And they were arrested for disturbing the peace. And, we sort of chuckled at that, but all of a sudden you stop and you think, whose peace are they disturbing? And you realize it's the status quo, it's that which wants to stay in power. And these individuals and combatants, they stand in a long line of people who have been willing to disturb the peace. Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela, Rosa Parks, on and on and on. And so if you take that full circle to the idea of practice, I take it from the collective to the individual, because we can only achieve collective liberation if we achieve individual liberation. And so to me, the practice around individual liberation begins with disturbing peace. And, as Marcina said, we traveled extensively around the world with the film. And we talked about this with audiences, with groups all over the world. And we asked, whose peace do you need to be willing to disturb first? Everyone would answer, our own. We wake up in the morning and we know we're the hero of our story. We're just trying to figure out who the villain is that day. What we need to be willing to do is to move into curiosity, to suspend that judgment, to disturb our own narratives, and begin to look at the ways in which we get stuck in these cultural narratives that create the other, and to do the hard work to move beyond that. And that's where the individual liberation is, and that's where the collective liberation is, I believe.
And I want to add to that, Steve. Sometimes we talk about being a hero. If you look at it, the film and CFP members, a lot of times they were influenced by people that, like, for example, Jamil, his mom crying when she heard the bloodshed of Israeli children. And because she lost her own son and she doesn't want anybody to feel that. And because she held that narrative, Jamil is who he is today. The guard at Shifa, when Shifa was in prison, the guard there that lost her brother, and Shifa thought that the guard would come back and retaliate, and she came back with compassion. And so every time there's an act of compassion, that's an act that is a heroic act. And so that is some people ask, well, what could I do? You're doing it already. You're either adding to the hatred or you're adding to the compassion and the movement away from it.
It's something Stephen just said kind of reminded me how I became an activist in the first place. So my name means beautiful. I know it's a bit of a misnomer, but Hassan in Arabic means beautiful. Unfortunately, it was also a reason why I was targeted with a lot of hate in the town I grew up in. It was extremely Islamophobic, anti-Arab discrimination was rampant. There was no safety. I think my problems are very small in comparison to what's going on, but it really hurt. It was very painful for me to be othered in that way. And I had all these narratives, right? And then I saw 9/11 happen, and then I saw that reaction, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and I'd studied politics, and I was just like, I'm out, folks. I don't want to do anything with this system. It just felt so wrong to me, and it was just so antithetical to my values. It wasn't until I actually went to the Middle East to actually spend time with my family in Jordan. I have a Bedouin tribe, the El-Tayyabs, which dominate one street in Madaba. There's like 70 relatives, uncles, cousins, they have kids, those kids have kids, they all live there. And I had never met them because I grew up with the white side of my family, my mom's side. But it was just like the embrace that I got. They had missed me for decades, and I didn't realize I had actually missed them too. I just didn't know I had missed them. I come back to the US, I just felt I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I had to do something because I knew that they were at risk because of US foreign policy. And, what I say to, people that are like, go back to where you came from, I'm like, well, I don't want to be a victim of US foreign policy. So, so it kind of really, I've doubled down and just wanted to, work on, liberation of my family and everyone that they're connected to. And, that's been my kind of North Star ever since. And I think, really, being in community with people is the way I kind of put, and I just kind of think of them every time I'm, heading up to the Hill and trying to pass a bill or at least get some co-sponsors. So
Thank you, Hassan, for sharing that from your own family experience and why we do this work. Such a reminder for all of us. There's a question that has come in about, can you offer specific examples of ways to mobilize art, music, and story making to help foster collective radical imagination work? And we just heard the story of the puppets and the arrest, the puppets and people who were disturbing the peace. We think about Tony Cade Bambara, who said the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Wonder about other
Mm.
examples that you all might want to share.
Yeah, I think that the puppets were brought into disturbing the peace through Bread and Puppet, which has its roots back in the 70s in the United States in terms of demonstrations and using art. But the combatants also use theater of the oppressed, Augusta Ball's work, and they use it in a way to really confuse people, because the ability to imagine something new also takes the ability to defocus and to go into a state of confusion of what you think is true. And art does a great job of that, right? Because it's something outside of our expectations. And I think, as they talk about within Theater of the Oppressed, the idea is to move people from being a spectator to being a spectator, to understand our own role within the drama. I'm actually at the airport and I'm heading over to Palestine and Israel when we get off of this call. And I'm going in part to film an update to Disturbing the Peace. And really I'm called there because there are people who are imagining beyond it. There's a member of Combatants for Peace who was born in Gaza, grew up in Gaza, was a member of Hamas. Is an incredible human being and stalwart nonviolent activist who has lost, and I say this not lightly, has lost 60 family members, his extended family, siblings, parents, nieces, nephews, and he is still standing for nonviolence. I will be spending time with him. I'll be spending time with a mother of somebody who lost her 20-year-old son on October 7th. And she has dedicated her life to making sure that no parent endures what she has endured. There is the son of Vivian Silver, who was one of the founders of Women Wage Peace, who imagined beyond the current narratives. And she was killed on October 7th. And her son has made it clear around the world that the moral stance of war is a crime in itself. And so using media and art and storytelling to help amplify these voices is what we're called to at this moment. And I think that art, music, when we heard Hassan, we had a gathering of Combatants for Peace, of Israelis and Palestinians, but also somebody from Syria, from Lebanon, somebody with deep roots to Jordan, Jenin. And Hassan offered a song that he had never played before for anybody, that we knew immediately it was a song that needed to be shared. And I know that we're going to get the great pleasure of hearing that song later on today. But that to me is the epitome, because it speaks to the soul level. It speaks at a level that's way beyond just the words. It brings us into a state of grief, of sorrow, of sadness, of connection, of longing for something different. And when that's ignited, that's when we can begin to reimagine.
And I think Steve, you want to mention about Noah, because Noah's going to be performing with Combatants here in New York.
Yeah, so there will be, for the Memorial Day ceremony, which I know Tiffany's going to speak about later, there will be a live ceremony in New York and Brooklyn. And the amazing Israeli singer Achinon Noah will be performing along with other people. And she has been tireless in every demonstration in Israel around the government, around ceasefire, around stopping the war and stopping all violence against humanity.
Well, I'm just noticing the through line from your mention of theater of the oppressed, the way those skills and role plays and tools can help us embody and imagine what we're building or transforming, and then the naming of an actual event that is doing that out in the world, which is this courageous manifestation piece. And the next question I want to bring to you all is, what does imagining a free Palestine look like? And how can the international community work in solidarity? Under Hassan, if you want to begin on this one.
Um, Good question. And I mean, for me, it's supporting Palestinians' hopes and dreams for their own future. Not trying to tell them what that should be or, dictating what it should be. It's listening, paying attention, and being a support. That's what I do as a lobbyist. I try to support Palestinian human rights. I kind of work in solidarity and supporting them, and Israelis who are pushing for human rights. So for me, number one, we need to end this brutal occupation that's been going on for decades. We need to end the blockade on Gaza. We need freedom of worship at Al-Aqsa for Palestinians. We need to make sure that settler violence stops, that settlement activity stops, period, and that there is not impunity for human rights violations, because that is what's going to sow the seeds of the next generation of violence and escalation. We just don't need this anymore. It's also looking at what Palestinians want for their own political future and horizon, and like actually trying to figure this out. There's robust polling that tells you where Palestinians are at, and how so many do support a peaceful resolution. Many want their own state. Many want Marwan Barghouti to actually be the president of Palestine. And so those are things that we have to understand and push towards. As far as the international community, we have to be complicit in peace. We have to, and not be complicit in war. So when our weapons are actually being used to, not support, initiatives that are going to, embolden diplomacy, we have to take a hard look at that and try to end that complicity and divest from it. And I think that's a responsibility for every single American. And we're trying. We're up against a lot of forces, but that's definitely our mandate. And but again, I'm in the long term, I'm very hopeful that we can get there.
And I concur with everything that Hassan just said. But I want to add one thing. And it's interesting, you talk, and I'll bridge this to the art. One of the last scenes in the film is a nonviolent protest at the wall, of Israelis on one side and Palestinians on the other, expressing their desire to be together. And the action that's happening is a vote at the UN. And it is a vote to acknowledge Palestine as a state. One of the things that is very tangible, that was an embarrassment, was for the US to veto at the UN the recognition of Palestine as a state. And that is a very clear, very tangible thing, that is a step toward a free Palestine and a sense of equality, of safety, security for everybody in the region and around the world.
There's speaking of a state, and I hear you, Hassan, reminding us how important it is to center self-determination of people to imagine their own futures. One of the questions that came in, can the speakers imagine a collective liberation that results in one democratic state in which both Palestinians and Israelis enjoy equal rights?
I'll take a shot at that. I would say that, and I'm going to defer really to Combatants for Peace, which is, as they said, it's not, this is not about what the solution is, because we know that it's really about the political will and about our leaders. And that's the work that we need to do, because there are many solutions that could work. And it is about self-determination, and allowing, sovereignty, and the right to make the decisions about what makes the most sense in that context for everybody. And why not? I mean, it's easy to imagine so many possibilities once we can move beyond the state of hatred and division that we, allowed ourselves to participate.
Anyone else want to comment on that one? Right.
I think Marcina had there's something on the tip of her tongue.
It's hard just because, again, I mean, I look at what's going on in the United States as well. And people get very fed up with politics and people opt out. And sometimes some of the best people are the ones that are opting out and not stepping forward. And I think that again, there was, my father used to always say, you can't legislate morality. And so I don't think it's got to come from humanity. In my opinion, we have got the reflection of what's happening in our world boils down to our humanity. And there is not one religion that I believe that anybody would want to follow that wants the destruction of another human being. I don't think any, and so it's not written in our connection to our spiritual lives here. And if anything, we're losing that and giving the power over to a political fear. And so in that, I think there's a bigger crisis that's happening in many different ways, and is humanity trying to decide who we are. And I do believe that it's each individual. Our vote comes in who we decide to be, where we spend our time, energy, and money. And so anybody that's working for organizations that are continuing hate, continuing to create bombs, they're all, like you said, Hassan, complicit in what we're creating. And we all have to take a look at it where it still lies within us, because it lies within us in every place, each one of us, I mean. And so at different levels, and where can we become a better voice for a better humanity?
Beautiful to become a better voice for a better humanity. So on that note, we have a question here, kind of the inner work. How can forgiveness take some space when forgiveness is insurmountable? Can a collective apology be done, or does the truth and reconciliation have to be done individually?
I do think that forgiveness, first of all, humanity's been, there's inhumanity to humanity that's happened throughout time. I come from Irish background, and I actually come from a Norwegian background, but when I was in Ireland, they called me a Paddy. And I'm like, why are you calling me a Paddy? I'm Norwegian. He goes, don't you know the Vikings came down here and pillaged our village and take the women? And I'm like, oh, so this is not, our inhumanity is not new. The question is have we come to the point where we can change it? And I do think that the forgiveness comes, and there's a great organization called the Forgiveness Project, at which they are incredible teachers of how forgiveness happens. And the forgiveness is something that you do for yourself, for your own freedom. It's not the need to forgive other people. It's to understand and have compassion for whatever happened, and then actually create a forgiveness for people within your own space and your own world. And the acknowledgement about it is really important whenever we can do that. Whenever we can acknowledge the pain that other people have endured, that also I feel like is a very important act of forgiveness.
Well, we have a related question here on truth and reconciliation. Has the advocacy in the South Africa played a role in your imagining of the future?
That's a great question, and I think it has to, on some level. As Marcina says, like the recognition of what we're capable of, taking account of it, and it's a very important part of the process. It's a very important part of the process. It is, you can't bypass that part of it and assume that you're going to get to equanimity, and to a collective liberation. And there's the concepts of restorative justice that have been brought into our judicial system and the United States in some communities. But there's a way of acknowledging participation, acknowledging responsibility, as a beginning of a process.
Hassan, I wonder if whether South Africa or other places, are there places in the world or historical contexts that you're looking to right now in your legislative work for inspiration in this struggle?
I mean, I guess, there's the apartheid struggle in South Africa, which I think is obviously relevant to this, but also what the Global South is doing right now at the UN is so inspiring to me. Continuing to put forward, the need for an immediate ceasefire, bringing hostages home, trying to end this conflict before it, boils into a full-blown regional war. The ICJ case that South Africa put forward, I think, is an absolute historic, motion, and that we should all be pushing to make sure that the measures that they ruled on to prevent genocide, to punish incitement of genocide, and to ensure robust humanitarian access is absolutely critical. I'm very disappointed in my own government, for not, supporting those measures and not doing what we need to actually make sure that things can get in. And so I'm just grateful to South Africa, Ireland, so many countries that have stepped up in this moment to say enough is enough. And the US and Israel are standing alone right now on the world stage. So I think that's huge. As far as like these other movements, I mean, the US has such a rich history of anti-war activism, and the horrific scenes we're seeing on these college campuses remind us of Kent State, back in the 60s, during the Vietnam era. And I never thought I'd see, National Guard rushing in, and it's just absolutely horrific to watch the crackdown on these protests. So, but we do have this legacy, and every generation has put forward freedom fighters, people that love peace so much that they're willing to put their quote unquote bodies on the gears of the system. And that to me is absolutely critical, that we keep that legacy going, and that this new generation of peace activists, say we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to sit around and let you ruin our democracy, ruin our planet, ruin any possibility for peace and stability in the world, because of why, I don't know. This is, so yeah, we got to look to our, both Malcolm X and MLK, and both the leaders, and leaders right here. Again, I don't mean to keep going on about Combatants for Peace. Suli, I met him in Palestine during my trip in January, in this really incredible moment. The whole world felt like it was just so chaotic. Airstrikes going off in Yemen, Iraq, Gaza war. And I met him at a friend of his house. I think maybe folks know Sammy. And we just had this kind of intimate evening where we played a bunch of guitar and talked about peace. And there were Israelis, there were Palestinians. And I could see the love in the room. And so, as much as we got to look to the leaders of the past, we've got some leaders right now that we need to follow and work with and support, and do whatever we can to get their vision out there.
And I want to give a lot of credit to Combatants for Peace, and even, when this current, I don't even know what to call it, because, events happened, Jamil called up his, a Palestinian calls up his Israeli cohorts with Combatants for Peace and said, okay, I know that you're in a difficult place right now, and we've got to have the conversation. We've got to come together, and they worked on processing it within the organization, and that's leadership. That's leadership. It's great to talk about how much you want and imagine something, but when the going gets tough, you get to find out who you are. And I think as humanity, we're finding out who we are. And I do think there's a lot of great leaders all around the world, including very many that are fighting down in South America for the Amazon and so forth. And I think it's inspiring to each other, to hear about each other, to find each other, and to continue it. And I have to remind everybody on this, everybody in one way is a leader. You have to find your own leadership within this and stand up. It's the normal average person that becomes a Nelson Mandela and a Martin Luther King and a Rosa Parks and so forth, and a Suli and a Chen and an Avner and a Jamil.
Beautiful. On that note, we're going to start drawing our time together to a close. And I want to just ask each of our panelists if you might share a word or a sentence that you're carrying with you as you go forward from this conversation. So often we show up for our perceived audience, but we're really an interwoven web of community. So I wonder what you're taking with you. Maybe Stephen, you could begin for us as you prepare to literally take flight to Palestine and Israel.
Ray, thank you so much for facilitating all of this and for making this conversation possible. For me, there's two words that came to me, so I'll just share them: grief and love.
How about you, Marcina?
I would say inspiration and courage.
And for you, Hassan.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Woohoo!
Is a good charge into action and next steps. And I'll just invite everyone who's with us, if you want to share a word or two, what you're taking with you in the chat. The chat is open. Please share. And we want to share some special invitations with you all here in our closing. And this relates to this act of courageous imagining. And for those of us who are Jewish like myself, we're in the midst of the holiday of Passover this week, which is the story of Exodus that also is told in Muslim and Christian faiths. And often in the Zionist narrative, that mythic framework is we go from the holiday of Passover to the holiday of Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Memorial Day, to Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day, to Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. And those holidays line up in a perfect story from the story of our own oppression to this miraculous state of Israel. And what I think one of the many strengths of Combatants for Peace is inviting us into a radical imagination of how we could retell that story by transforming this day into a joint gathering of grief and collective care for one another, and really returning to one of those key stories, lessons we can take away from Exodus, from Passover, which is one of collective solidarity and freedom for all, and that idea that we get free with and for each other. And so just big gratitude to Combatants for Peace for guiding us in this kind of a vision of really retelling and breaking down a myth of a lineage of holidays to embrace a different idea of what it means to grieve and remember together. And I want to thank all of our panelists for the rich wisdom and depth of sharing that you bring to this re-envisioning, and pass the mic on to Carly with Combatants for Peace to tell us about these ceremonies that are coming up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ray. So yes, my name's Carly. I work in the Tel Aviv office of Combatants for Peace, and am responsible for international outreach and development. And I'm also helping organize the joint memorial this year. So I won't talk too much about it, as we've already spoken a lot about it, but I'll just highlight that this year, due to the current situation and a lot of sensitivities and security concerns, we have decided to host the ceremony virtually. which also means that you can join from anywhere in the world. Apologies for my dog. And so we'll encourage you in the chat to register to watch the ceremony. You can also join and host a event in your home or a public event with an organization or a community. We really want to create as many community gatherings as possible to share this message of hope, of unity, of grieving together, both Israelis and Palestinians. So please check that out, and also consider donating to the crowdfunding campaign. The ceremony is largely funded by donations from the audience, so we would really appreciate if you consider donating. And we also have the Nakba Remembrance Ceremony, which is in its 5th year. It is also a joint Israeli-Palestinian ceremony that Combatants for Peace hosts. And this year it's a few days after Memorial on the 15th of May. And you can also register to watch the ceremony online. And it's an opportunity to both remember and acknowledge the tragedy and pain of 1948, Palestinian Nakba or catastrophe, and break down these taboos that exist around these stories and this history.
Beautiful. Thank you, Carly, and hope everyone can access these links in the chat. And to close our gathering, I'd like to invite Hassan to share a song with us. As you're listening, I invite you to just fully take in these words, to carry them with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This was fun. So this is a tune I wrote called "Better Off Together," and I hope it resonates. Tell me, have you read the news? Oh, hold on a second. Let me start again. Okay. Tell me, have you read the news? The whole damn world has got the blues. If we knew the only way out was through, you and I are better off together. And if we sing with one voice, someday we might form a chorus loud enough to end these wars. Yeah, you and I are better off together. Better off together. Better off together. One thing I know is you and I are better off together. If the oceans start to rise, I know your boat is tied to mine. It matters not where we reside. Let's get to higher ground together. And if we hear mothers cry in Israel or Palestine, no, we won't turn no blind eyes. Let's get to higher ground together. If we all took a stand, we could stop wars across this land. Yes, I hope we all understand. You and I are better off together. Better off together. Better off together. One thing I know is you and I are better off together. If you're lost and don't know where you belong, come find me in the the darkness before the dawn. I hope it don't take long to help me sing this song. We're better off together. Take my hand and come with me, and I'll take your hand and come with you. 'Cause we know the only way out was through, and you and I are better off together. Better off together. Better off together. One thing I know is you and I are better off together. We're better off together. Better off together. One thing I know is we're better off together. Thank you all.
Better off together. Amen. May it be so. Thanks to all of you, again, all of our panelists and Combatants for Peace for hosting, and we'll see you all next time in the streets and at the memorial.